October 20, 1989, St. Joseph, Minnesota. It was a quiet evening in St. Joseph, Minnesota. 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling rode his bike home with friends. Suddenly, a masked man appeared, armed with a gun. He ordered the boys to lie face down. Then, Jacob was taken, vanishing into the night. For 27 years, his family waited for answers. The truth that finally emerged would horrify the nation. It was the night of October 22, 1989, in St. Joseph, a quiet, small town in Minnesota. 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling was excited to go out with his younger brother, Trevor, and his best friend, Aaron Larson. They had convinced their parents to let them ride their bikes to a nearby convenience store to rent a movie. The calm neighborhood streets felt safe. After all, it was a small community where everyone knew each other. But that night would quickly turn into one of the darkest nightmares in American history. After picking up the movie, the three friends began pedaling back home. It was already dark, and the only stretch left was a dimly lit dirt road. There, unexpectedly, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, blocking their path. The man was wearing a mask and holding a gun, ordering the boys to lie face down on the ground. The innocence of that night was shattered in seconds. The abductor forced the children to state their names and ages. Then he ordered Trevor and Aaron to run into the woods and not look back. Jacob remained with the abductor, and that was the last time anyone ever saw him alive. Panicked, the two boys ran to a nearby house and called the police. Within minutes, the desperate search for Jacob Wetterling had begun. Authorities arrived quickly at the scene. Search dogs, flashlights, and patrols combed the area throughout the night, but Jacob and the abductor had vanished completely. There were no footprints, no abandoned objects, no concrete clues. The trail had disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared. St. Joseph, once a symbol of peace, was instantly plunged into panic and disbelief. News of Jacob's disappearance spread rapidly across Minnesota and soon reached national headlines. Parents began keeping their children at home, and a collective fear swept the country. The Wetterling case was no longer just local, it had become a national trauma, and the clock had begun ticking against the hope of a happy ending. Within the first 24 hours, authorities in Minnesota realized this was not a simple disappearance. The FBI was immediately called in, joining forces with state police, local sheriffs, and volunteers. It was the beginning of one of the largest search operations in American history up to that point. Teams with search dogs scoured forests, creeks, and rural properties surrounding St. Joseph. But Jacob seemed to have been swallowed by the darkness of that night. Helicopters equipped with searchlights flew over vast wooded areas daily. Mounted police patrolled farmland, while dive teams inspected nearby lakes and reservoirs. Volunteers combed through fields, barns, and dirt roads, holding on to renewed hope each day. But time was working against them. With every passing day, the chances of finding Jacob alive grew slimmer. Each morning without answers only intensified the family's anguish. Patty and Jerry Wetterling, Jacob's parents, quickly became the face of the fight. They gave emotional interviews daily, pleading publicly for their son's safe return. The mother's look of pain and the father's restrained desperation touched millions of Americans. Programs like America's Most Wanted and Oprah helped project the case onto the national stage. The entire country followed the family's agony as if it were their own. But leads were scarce. Numerous people were questioned, including registered sex offenders in the area. Suspicious vehicles were stopped, and neighbors with criminal histories were placed under surveillance. But every investigative path led to a dead end. Jacob's abductor appeared to have carried out the crime with calculated precision. With no physical evidence, the case slowly began to grow cold in the following months. The large-scale search efforts diminished, but the family's desperation only deepened. Patty and Jerry Wetterling refused to give up the fight. They transformed their pain into permanent activism, creating one of the most significant missing persons campaigns in U.S. history. But Jacob's whereabouts remained an absolute mystery. Within a few months, Jacob Wetterling's name was known in nearly every American household. His brown eyes, shy smile, and the photo of him wearing a yellow t-shirt became symbols printed on posters, newspapers, and national broadcasts. The Wetterlings' pain moved the country like few cases ever had before. More than just the search for a missing child, the case became a symbol of national vulnerability. If Jacob could disappear in St. Joseph, any child could disappear anywhere. Media coverage was intense and constant. Television networks broadcast daily updates. Radio stations dedicated hours of programming to the case. Jacob's story even reached the White House, touching legislators, officials, and then President George H.W. Bush. The national outcry grew so strong that, within months, the case was already influencing political debates on child safety. It marked the beginning of an impact far greater than the criminal investigation itself. Patty Wetterling became a national spokesperson for the families of missing children. Together with her husband, she pushed for legislative changes to improve the registration and response to child abductions. Her activism led to one of the most important legal milestones in the UAS, the Jacob Wetterling Act of 1994. The law required states to establish public registries of convicted sex offenders. The family's personal tragedy resulted in profound transformation in American security policy. Meanwhile, new leads would occasionally surface, but none ever held up. Alleged sightings of Jacob were reported in other states and even abroad. Psychics offered visions and locations to authorities. Each false lead was another form of torture for the Wetterling family, clinging to hope that this time it might be real. But reality always returned to square one. Even as years passed, Jacob's case was never forgotten. Annual vigils, awareness campaigns, and ongoing public support kept his face alive in the nation's memory. St. Joseph, once an almost anonymous town, became a painful landmark on America's true crime map. Jacob Wetterling involuntarily became the face of all America's missing children. But the central question still echoed: where was Jacob? As the years went by, the Wetterling case became a national symbol of both struggle and frustration. With each anniversary of the disappearance, new events were organized, keeping Jacob's name alive in the collective memory. The Wetterlings, tireless, participated in hundreds of events, interviews, and legislative campaigns. But at home, the emptiness of Jacob's untouched room and the silence of countless nights continued to consume the family. It was the agonizing wait for an answer that never came. The FBI and Minnesota State Police never officially closed the case. Periodically, they followed up on new leads, re-interviewed old suspects, and even pursued unlikely theories. The database of sex offenders grew over time, and new forensic technologies fueled hopes for a breakthrough. But the years continued to accumulate, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and still no Jacob. The absence of answers became even more unbearable with each passing anniversary. Jacob's story also transformed how the UAS handles child disappearances. The Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children Act of 1994 became the foundation of the modern sex offender registry system, which would later give rise to Megan's Law and the Adam Walsh Act. The Wetterling family's suffering not only reshaped their own lives, but structurally changed the American system itself. Thousands of other victims have been protected because of reforms inspired by the case. Even in his absence, Jacob brought about real change. Meanwhile, Theories continued to circulate in the American true crime community. Some pointed to pedophile rings, others to opportunistic kidnappers from within the town itself. But no theory ever held up to the rigorous tests of the official investigation. Without physical evidence, Jacob's case remained stalled. It was the kind of mystery that frustrated even the most seasoned investigators. For 27 long years, the Wetterlings carried their pain with both public visibility and tremendous dignity. They became counselors to other families and a national symbol of resilience. But deep down, they never let go of their desire to find their son, alive or dead. Not knowing was the wound that bled every single day, but everything would suddenly change in 2016. In 2015, a parallel investigation unexpectedly reignited the Jacob Wetterling case. Police arrested a man named Daniel Heinrich, 52, on charges of child pornography possession. During the investigation, authorities realized that Heinrich had previously been one of the original suspects in Jacob's case, though never formally charged. Now, with new DNA technology, evidence began to emerge. The net was finally closing in. Heinrich had been questioned at the time of Jacob's disappearance, but was released due to a lack of concrete evidence. Now, new DNA samples linked him to a prior sexual assault committed against another boy in the same region in 1989. This connection immediately renewed authorities' focus on his potential involvement in Jacob's case. The psychological pressure on Heinrich escalated rapidly. He was on the verge of breaking. In September 2016, as part of a plea agreement to avoid a life sentence for child pornography charges, Heinrich finally confessed. In a detailed deposition, he revealed what had happened to Jacob that night in 1989. He admitted to abducting the boy, taking him to a remote area, sexually assaulting him, and then killing him out of fear of being identified. He buried Jacob's body in a field in Painesville, not far from St. Joseph. The mystery that had haunted the nation for 27 years finally had its answer. Authorities immediately located Jacob's remains exactly where Heinrich had described. His belongings, clothes, sneakers, and T-shirt were also recovered. Forensic confirmation officially closed the mystery. Jacob Wetterling had finally been found, but the brutality of the confession inflicted an even deeper pain on the family. The entire country watched in shock as the case came to a close. Daniel Heinrich's name instantly became synonymous with evil and cowardice. Though convicted only on child pornography charges, his confession ensured he would remain incarcerated for decades. For the Wetterling family, the nightmare ended with answers, but not with relief. It was the end of a cruel wait, but not the end of the pain. After nearly 3 decades of anguish, Patty and Jerry Wetterling were finally able to lay their son to rest. A private ceremony was held, surrounded by family, friends, and members of the St. Joseph community. Thousands of people across the country paid tribute to the family that had, for so long, represented the struggle and hope of all parents. At last, Jacob could rest, but the void left by his absence would remain forever. The revelation of what truly happened that night brought conflicting emotions to the family. On one hand, they finally had answers. On the other, they were forced to relive the raw pain of imagining Jacob's suffering at the hands of his captor. The wound that time had partially numbed was brutally reopened. But now, at least, they no longer carried the burden of the unknown. Patty Wetterling became an even greater figure of inspiration after the case was resolved. She continued her advocacy work, transforming her pain into even more powerful activism. Her words of compassion and forgiveness inspired thousands of other families to find strength in the face of their own tragedies. Through his mother, Jacob continued to make an impact even after his death. The Wetterling family story became one of the most respected in the fight against crimes against children. The Wetterling case also became the foundation for numerous reforms within the American criminal justice system. The early investigative failures fueled changes in search protocols, data sharing, and prioritization of forensic technology. Sex offender registration and tracking programs were improved nationwide. Jacob did not die in vain. His tragedy left a legacy of protection for future generations. His absence gave life to many. The resolution of the case also carried rare symbolism in the world of American true crime. Few child disappearances of such national prominence end with the recovery of remains and a full confession from the killer. The resolution of the Jacob Wetterling case became one of the most important and studied stories in U.S. criminal history. But even with its ending, the mark of his absence remains. Jacob lives on forever in America's collective memory. Today, the name Jacob Wetterling remains one of the most respected within the child abduction and child protection advocacy world. The Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, founded by his parents, continues to assist families and work toward preventing crimes against children. The organization provides psychological support, police training, and public policy guidance on child safety. The boy from St. Joseph has become a national symbol of protection and advocacy. Even in his absence, Jacob continues to save lives every single day. St. Joseph, the small town forever marked by his disappearance, has turned trauma into solidarity. Memorials, annual events, and educational programs keep Jacob's memory alive. The community has embraced its role as guardian of his legacy, educating new generations about safety and empathy. The boy who was taken at age 11 has never been forgotten by his neighbors and friends. His town remains his spiritual home. Patty and Jerry Wetterling continue to stand as symbols of resilience, dignity, and humanitarian activism. Their story has inspired laws, social movements, and deep national conversations about prevention, justice, and forgiveness. They have transformed their personal grief into strength for thousands of families. The Wetterling name has become synonymous with courage in the face of absolute horror, and their mission remains alive. The Jacob Wetterling case has also become a subject of academic study in law, criminology, and forensic psychology courses. Experts analyze not only the crime, but also the investigative failures and the legislative impact that followed. His disappearance triggered major changes in how the United States handles crimes against children to this day. Jacob is no longer just a victim. He has become a milestone in American judicial history. His story transcended tragedy. Even today, Jacob Wetterling's image continues to appear in prevention campaigns and national remembrance efforts. His absence remains painful, but his story serves as an ongoing warning, educational tool, and source of inspiration. The question, "Where is Jacob?" haunted the country for 27 years. Today, America knows the answer, but the pain of his loss continues to teach. Jacob Wetterling has not been forgotten, and he never will be. Decades after that night in 1989, the name Jacob Wetterling remains a landmark in American history. His story is told in classrooms, safety seminars, legal conferences, and human rights summits. The 11-year-old boy became not only the symbol of a brutal crime, but of a national movement for child protection. He represents the trauma of thousands of families who face the disappearance of a child. And he also represents the strength of those who transform pain into hope. The Jacob Wetterling Resource Center continues to expand its mission, supporting families in similar crises. Its educational programs impact parents, schools, and authorities, creating an ongoing network of prevention and awareness. Patty and Jerry Wetterling have become mentors to other families, sharing their story not as lament, but as a source of strength. They turned the horror they lived through into a platform for real change. And with that, Jacob's memory remains alive and active in every action that saves another child. For the American criminal justice system, the Wetterling case has become a permanent subject of study. Mistakes made, forensic advancements, investigative failures, and institutional lessons are constantly reviewed to improve future protocols. Jacob's disappearance and delayed resolution redefined the very concept of missing persons investigations in the United States. Criminology and law experts study the case as one of the leading references in child abduction. His story shaped not only laws, but investigative procedures for an entire nation. The small town of St. Joseph, once synonymous with rural tranquility, has become a national symbol of community resilience. The streets where Jacob once rode his bike now carry the weight and pride of his memory. Memorials scattered throughout the town invite visitors and residents alike to reflect on child protection and justice. The pain of that night remains, but it has been transformed into a lasting source of learning. St. Joseph has not forgotten Jacob, and never will. In America's collective consciousness, the name Jacob Wetterling will forever serve as an eternal call to remember what was lost, to honor what was learned, to protect those who can still be saved. Jacob Wetterling will never be just a statistic. He is, and will always be, one of America's children. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next cases.